Welcome everyone. It looks like we've got people joining here. So just give people here a couple minutes and we'll get going. Okay, it looks like a number of people come in and slow down a little bit. Let me go ahead. We'll kick things off here while we're waiting for people to finish joining here. But I do want to thank everybody for taking time out of your schedule today to join us. This is our first event in our threat education series. We do have a team of experts assembled here for you to talk about DarkSide, its impact it's had on things like the Colonial pipeline. To introduce myself, I'm Eric Wing. I'm one of the technical leaders here at Trend Micro. And while people are joining, let me go ahead and introduce the rest of the team and kind of what our agenda is here for today. I have Jay Yanza, who's the director of MDR operations. He's going to be reviewing the history of DarkSide, how it's operated as an organization, and really what its impact has been, on things like the Colonial pipeline and other organizations. Then we also have Kent Stevens, who is our senior security solutions engineer. He's actually going to be walking us through the DarkSide ransomware, the infection chain itself, and showing us what the characteristics of it are and what impact it can have within that. We also have several people that are going to be monitoring the chat and the Q&A. This includes myself, and then we've got Mila, Marco, Chris, and Tim. We want this to be as interactive as possible, so please utilize both the chat and the Q&A. We want to know you're there. Don't be afraid to engage with us. You don't have to wait to the end. Sometimes it's nice to see the interaction with people. We will have some time at the end, for Q&A. The speakers can maybe answer some questions live, but do utilize those features during the event here. Don't hesitate to ask any questions you may have. So with that, let me go ahead and thank everybody again for joining, and I'll pass it over to Jay, and we can get started.
All right, thank you, Eric. So good day, everyone. Let's go through a few items about what we know about the DarkSide ransomware attack. But before we go down deep into this topic, let's zoom out a little bit and really look at what happens when we have such ransomware attack, right? So when you read the news and you read about ransomware families, one of the things that is often overlooked or not even mentioned is the fact that current ransomware operations is actually a very, very huge organization, it's actually a huge movement. And we've seen this shift around 2016, right? So initially, we've observed over time that these ransomware operators tend to go at their victims alone. And around 2016 up to the current date, they've actually moved into a more robust infrastructure, having really a ransomware as a service operations, coordinating with multiple, we call them peddlers of access into the environment. And then you have the ransomware operators where they actually pick their own targets. So this shift actually happens because, well, for one, it actually got harder for these threat actors to gain access into the environment. So they actually had to work with different groups who had prior access or had done previous work on maybe a target organization. And so this actually enabled them to really go inside and have all of those authentications, those credentials, maybe the number of hosts and the IP address that were interesting for them. So at the current point, we see and we've observed that these ransomware operators, they actually just buy their way into access into the organization. And it's for the most part, when you're buying access into the to the target organization, you generally don't know what, well, the ransomware threat actors generally don't know what they're buying access to. And so usually when they buy these access, there's a couple of like a few days or maybe a few hours where they poke around and see what is actually interesting within that organization, that access that they bought. So that being said, it could be that there was a period of time during the initial attack that was not related to ransomware, but further down the line, like maybe a year, a few months, or even weeks, that you would be targeted for a ransomware attack. Now, with this, it's actually important to understand that ransomware, so whatever ransomware family that you hear out there in the news, Clop, Nephilim, DarkSide for one, they're all just tools. And for obvious reasons where these tools are actually deployed, they are actually doing encryption for the purposes of doing extortion. This business process actually had changed, and the industry has observed that they all go through like potentially 4 phases, right? You have the single extortion, where it was really just deploying the ransomware as a nature of the business, but they could go up to double extortion, triple extortion, maybe quadruple extortion. The most common ones that we've seen today is double extortion, where there is a significant amount of effort so that they could actually exfil the data before they actually launch the final ransomware payload. And so the key to this as well is that as they're going through these phases, these threat actors tend to use legitimate tools and have known to have key admin accounts as part of their tool set. And the ransomware itself is the last stage of the intrusion itself. So, meaning because at the end of the intrusion, when they've been able to get the data that they're actually interested in, the ransomware deployment would be the most obvious thing that maybe an IT admin or security operations center would actually see. If it's not taking down servers, then it would be the ransom note being created multiple times over and over again within the environment. And so this is considered end stage. That means to say, once you're able to identify there's ransomware, you have to think, what other data, or is there potential data that was actually gathered from the environment because they're already at the end stage of the attack. It's also important to understand that every business, right, every business that's on the internet right now can be a target. And any business that's actually connected to the internet can be a target, primarily because for the most part, like up to 90% of all organizations have history of being afflicted by some malware intrusion over time. So if you're not a target today, there is actually a very high potential that you may be a target tomorrow. It's just a matter of being interesting enough for the threat actors. So at the current state, you would most likely observe that the news is actually they actually cover like big game. And this is primarily because they, like humans, they don't want to spend a lot of effort into getting change, so to speak. And they want to focus like one big intrusion, get the payback, and actually make money out of that. And so the bigger the business is, the more lucrative it becomes for these ransomware operations. And finally, it was also important to note that with the use of legitimate tools and applications, having these accounts, they are essentially, these ransomware threat actors, they're essentially within your network, and they've adopted very sophisticated methods. And when they say sophisticated, we mean that they're able to blend within the environment. And so prior to this, cybercrime by itself was really just a routine smash and grab operations. And the APT level, or the advanced persistent level expertise, was really kept to like state-sponsored operations. This is not the same today, because we've seen that ransomware operators really take their time, really take a lot of caution into navigating the ins and outs of the environment to be very, very hidden from plain view. And so this is quite an interesting development. Again, we've seen this, of course, over time as the threat actors' tactics has evolved. Now, that being said, let's go through the topic of the day. Let's look at the dark side. So if you've been following the news and maybe have looked at DarkSide, and there's a lot of news outlets actually covering it. They're relatively new. They have been first spotted around 2020, August of 2020, and their main motive is really financial gain. That's it. If you go to extortion or maybe crypto mining, that's actually just a basic motive. It's just financial gain. They, and the onset, they have openly mentioned that they actually don't target certain countries, certain industries. In fact, some of the write-ups also do mention that they have charitable work, and where they actually have had donated some of the money that they were able to gather into some of the interesting organizations that they would like to quote unquote partner. However, if you look at the right side of the screen here, you could see that the transition of their operations really was quite interesting. So August 2020, you see that there was an introduction of DarkSide as a ransomware in the dark web. The establishment of the ransomware as a model, ransomware as a service model, and then you could see that around November, like a few months after, there was some intent or some effort to make sure that their infrastructure was robust, and making sure that there's like a content delivery network to store the compromised data. So they're going for double extortion, and then they actually did have some leakage to the press for their public leak site. And this, we believe, is actually intentional, primarily because the more coverage you get from these news outlets, then anyone who's afflicted with this so-called ransomware would be very sensitive. And so coverage for their malware, for this ransomware, would intentionally actually give them like some sort of street credibility, so to speak. There was an update to their malware around March 2021. Then, as we know, May of 2021, then they launched the attack. Now, it doesn't mean to say that they themselves launched the attack at the get-go. It means to say that they have been able to acquire access into the environment potentially before May 2021. So another perspective of looking at the attack, you could see that days after this event, on May 7th, there was like a news that broke out that there was a payout of $4.5 million US. And then you could see that there were a lot of activities after that event. You could also see that this operations has been fairly lucrative. So the 3 victims, at least the one that they had been able to publish around May, and at that time they were able to take around $90 million US with just a few select targets, really going after big game. Now, going over to the consequences of this attack, one of the more interesting parts here is the fact that there was a conscious decision to pay the ransomware. And I think this is something that everyone should take note, should have a mental note. If you read through the news here, this was actually a very difficult situation for Colonial Pipeline, and it was reportedly one of the most difficult decisions that the CEO had to make. So the payout was deemed necessary because they wanted to continue the operations of providing fuel to the East Coast. So this was deemed as a necessary business decision. However, because of the coverage that this intrusion actually gathered, there was immediately news that the servers were actually seized. The operation was shut down. So less than a few months shy from a whole year of the operations, they did make a lot of money. However, the operation did actually shut down, and accordingly, there was around half of the ransomware payment was actually recovered. Unintentionally, however, the ransomware threat actors who were involved in this did draw a lot of heat. So if you recall, around November of 2020, last year, and there was like an intention for them to draw attention. However, with this move of attacking a very large target, they actually draw heat. And now you can see a lot of the coverage here about what we need to do in the United States to act on similar ransomware attacks in the future. And I think this is one of those things that I believe that the ransomware threat actors did not want to take on. It's something that unintentionally that they have brought upon themselves because they were going after such big game. Now we went through the overall compromise here. So Trend Micro was not a participant in the analysis of this breach. It was a lot of the information was actually covered through the FBI indicator of compromise list, and we were able to get this list and actually make an outline of how things actually had evolved. There's also not a lot of information about how exactly the timeline actually happened, but from what was divulged and was mentioned in the news, it would have started around the 29th of April, the prior month. Now, from my standpoint, looking at this, most ransomware intrusions to this scale would take around somewhere like 10 to 14 days, like a little over a week to maybe 2 weeks. And here, if we say that the timeline started around the 29th of April, then they did the intrusion around the 7th of May, and then that leads us to about 8 days approximately. The timeline's correct, and that tells us that the threat actors did not waste any time into doing the intrusion, recognizing that this was actually a big target, and then going after all the data, doing the compromise. What's also important to remember here is that this is not the chain of events is not is actually not really dated. I mean, it's not, you don't time it correctly. So the success that you could do in 8 days, 10 days, or maybe 2 weeks, if you're able to do it in about 4 days, then that would be potentially the timeline that this would actually have happened. A lot of the time would be somewhere between lateral movement over here and then data exfiltration, primarily because you want to get that data out as soon as you can. Make sure that as a threat actor, you'll be able to see it, be able to use it for extortion further down the line, and then launch your ransomware. Based on the threat activity that we're able to observe, that the transition from data exfiltration into that ransomware event happens less than a day, usually in a matter of a few hours, right? Threat actors have to waste no time into deploying the ransomware once they've completed the data exfiltration, if this was actually their motive. And as you can see, when we look at these indicators and compared to previous threat actor groups and previous ransomware events, this is very typical of that business, of that cybercrime business. And a lot of these tools were not surprising. Now, to bring you over to a more detailed blow-by-blow account of the intrusion, I'll pass you over to Kent.
Thanks, Jay. Appreciate that. Let me just share my screen here. Can we confirm you can see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. Thanks, Mila. Appreciate it. So like Jay said, my name is Kent Stevens. I'm a senior sales engineer and XDR champion at Trend Micro. My session today, Jay had a very good segue to it, is around the infection routine that we've seen with DarkSide, a little bit about their tools, their tactics, the techniques, and then we'll give you some visualization of what like an XDR solution would be able to provide you visibility into this particular activity of these adversaries. So let's have a quick peek at the infection routine. So like Jay said, the timeline of events has never really been given, but essentially we do know that, during those gaining entry phases of the attack, we've seen phishing, we've seen RDP, we've seen exploiting of known vulnerabilities as tactics used by this group. And they use, like he said, common tools that you may seem normal within the environment, allows them to blend in, to be undetected and obfuscate their attack. So we've seen PowerShell, we've seen Metasploit, We've seen Mimikatz, we've seen Bloodhound, we've also seen Cobalt Strike for installation, which has been very common in a lot of the attacks today. And like he said, it's not their mantra today to get in and just hit. They want to get in, they want to map the environment, understand where the resources are, and really get the data that's of value so they can start the extortion process. So as they move from those gaining entry phases and they move into that lateral movement, this is their key discovery phase within the modern ransomware process. In general, their goal is to find those valuable assets, right? Targets, right? Find those files, get them out of the environment, and really set them up for exfiltration and their encryption steps. So in the case of DarkSide, you know, we've had confirmed reports and we've confirmed this ourselves that their mantra is really to gain access to the domain controller or Active Directory access. So which they're going to use to steal credentials, escalate privilege, and even acquire valuable assets for data exfiltration later, right? And then it's going to continue moving through the environment, right? Making sure that they can leverage the DC later, right? To really drop the ransomware payload to the connected machines that they are targeting. And some of the known lateral movement methods we've seen by DarkSide, we've seen PS exec and we've seen RDP. But as Jay noted, you know, these modern ransomware groups are really adapting to APT tactics and techniques, and they adapt their tooling. So as you know, these guys are discovered, they've, you know, really changed their defenses or changed their mantra as they moved into environments based on the victim's defense methods, right? So what's in place there? And then last but not least, the impact. So after they get that data out, right, in the Colonial pipeline, it was about 100 gigs of data that they exfiltrated. Then they're actually going to start the process to deploy. And that's really where they go from the undetected side to where they know that they're actually going to be detected. And like Jay had mentioned, they're going to hit very quickly. And so what can we do today? What's out there? What resources can we use? So obviously, you know, as we move into this next evolution of security practice, you know, MITRE, the attack framework, is really going to be able to allow you to get details on your adversary. So if you don't know much about the MITRE attack framework, I highly suggest you learn about it. It's a very valuable tool you can use to adapt your current security measures, but also look into your known adversaries. And so during this attack, we've kind of phased out about 45 different tactics along the way, and really mapping back to the activities really of APT groups and not what we've seen from ransomware groups in the past. So what I want to do today is I want to give you a little bit of a visualization of what an XDR system will be able to bring you. So essentially, first we'll look at system discovery, how they use the living off the land tools to really find out where they're at, where the system assets are, where the gateways are, where DNS is, allowing them to really map the environment. We'll also look at some discovery, especially with their ingress tool transfer, right? They're going to leverage tools inside the environment to get their files, their ransomware, the tool sets they're going to use inside, and get them to the machines necessary to actually, you know, deploy the ransomware. And then last, I'm going to look a little bit about at the data encryption for impact stage and what that visualization looks like, and really how that is impactful, because at that point, right, they've already started, they're ready to extort their victim. It's a very valuable insight inside the environment. And so let me just quickly jump over to an XDR console and really focus in on the first one I wanted to talk about, which is the discovery phase. So what we see here is what we'll call an investigator's workbench. Really gives a visualization of those raw logs, right? Giving you objects with obviously icons to better tell what's actually happening, to really paint the picture of what we're seeing. And so these workbenches are really going to be taking events that happen in your environment, and they're going to be mapped to MITRE tactics and techniques, allowing you to gain visibility into the activities you're actually looking at. So they're going to provide overviews and summaries of what you're actually looking at. So what we're seeing here is actually a process leveraging multiple discovery tools and tools that we see every day inside our environments. First one being IP config, right? Understanding the network, trying to have an understanding of where they are, where they need to go, giving them some visibility and how they move laterally throughout your network. The other one we see is who am I, right? Basically trying to get account discovery or user directory information or user discovery information, who's actually logged into this machine. So very valuable as they start to map out the environment, trying to make their way to the domain controllers. And what we also see within this single workbench is we see some activity here to a particular URL called lagrom.com. And if you're not familiar, this is part of the IOC poll from the DarkSide group. So what we're actually seeing in this workbench is we're seeing what I believe to be my domain controller, and now I can prove from detailed information, but essentially understanding that multiple machines inside the environment have actually accessed this URL and communicated with it, ensuring some suspicious activity has happened because of that, and allow you to actually investigate further. But what these workbenches will be able to do in these XDR systems will allow you to prioritize these alerts. So they're going to build in scoring systems so that there's an algorithm of a detection model that'll have a base score. And then depending upon the impact and the importance of the impact scope, such as important users or important devices, it will be able to amplify the scores so that you can prioritize those alerts according to criticality within your organization. So allowing you to have the details to really expand your investigation and actually get visibility into the adversary's techniques. And like Jay said, it's not the get in and hit anymore. It's get in, discover, right, exfiltrate, and then actually deploy the ransomware. The next workbench I wanted to look at really is around the ingress tool transfer. And this is really where network analytics plays a picture. A lot of that other activity was on the endpoint, but as we evolve our investigation, we need visibility into things like email and network so we can see how threats got into the environment and seeing how they move throughout the environment. Because once they leave the endpoint, we lose visibility with certain EDR solutions, and that's where XDR solutions will pay huge value as you investigate threats inside your environment. So what we're looking at here is actually mapped back to MITRE. It's a T1105. We can see the mappings from within these workbenches also. But what we're seeing here is them actually moving PS exec around the environment, getting it to the machines that they want to use to leverage their attack, right? And so like the other one, we saw, the score, so you can do prioritization. You can see your impact scope. There's also timelines here. So very valuable information. The other piece of this workbench that gets highlighted here is actually the PS exec executing by a process after it's been delivered to the machines that are going to deliver the payload or whatever the next phase of the attack is. And what this really is this is actually kind of some things we see around Cobalt Strike in environments. It's one of the steps they use and one of the tools they use to leverage to actually achieve this step. So very powerful, right? So obviously this links back to MITRE also. And so what else is really important here is there's some network analytics which can serve huge value. So essentially, hopefully this loads perfect. So essentially, endpoint, activity, very important, but network activity can help tell the story and show value, especially when you're investigating, to actually have an understanding of where something moved to, if it moved with something, if it did a CNC callback. And being able to play out these type of analytics, we can see a compromised machine reach out to the internet. We see a tool transfer happen here. We see a malicious transfer. Then we see some SMB traffic, another CNC callback, and then we see, everything break loose here. They've moved their tools, and within this correlated workbench, not only do they move their tools, but they actually deliver the payload from the network share from the domain controller, all within a consolidated view, giving you, visibility into lateral movement, malicious transfer of their tool sets, and CNC callback information. Very valuable as you investigate a threat to gain this level of visibility. All right, the next one I want to show you, just let me slide over really quick. All right, the next workbench I want to break into is a Workbench ransomware and the propagination being detected within the environment. So this is actually all correlated back up into that last workbench we looked at. But essentially what this is giving us a visualization of is actually the ransomware file being distributed throughout the environment. So allowing you to see them drop it from that network share, give you visibility into the impact scope, right? And really tie that back to MITRE. And really where MITRE plays into this is for those junior analysts or people new to the security industry. It really lets security personnel speak a common language. That common knowledge base is based off real world events, right? They really map back to the adversaries, the tactics they use, some detection capabilities, some remediation capabilities, and really will enable you as the security analyst into the activities of our adversaries. So super important, right? That kind of linkage between XDR systems and MITRE. And that's really the magic which happens in the background of these systems. And from here, obviously you see a lot of key highlights happening in the environment, right? We can confirm its SMB traffic. We can confirm its lateral movement. And this is all captured from the network side, right? This is all captured from network activity, right? Not any activity on the endpoint as per se. The other thing we can also do is we can look at execution profiles from within these XDR systems, really letting us understand exactly how that executed in the environment. They will also have contextual menus, right, around having the ability to respond. So isolate endpoints from the network. So if you see something malicious and you need to act, you can isolate very quickly. You can also do remote shell sessions from XDR platforms, essentially allowing you to further investigate or possibly do some kind of forensics like collecting files, right? Insight into processes running. And then the ability to run customized scripts, which really helps with evolving your search, either gathering information or doing tasks on that particular endpoint. And like I said, these are contextually aware menus, allowing you to do different tasks depending upon what kind of object that you click on. So very, very valuable in that regard. And then the last piece I want to show you is really the power of these XDR systems, right? XDR systems are basically, data lakes in the cloud, which, ingest data from a number of different data sources, right? The value of this is it gives you a lot of data at your fingertips. So if you're looking or searching or hunting for DarkSide within your environment, you have the ability to quickly do things like look for their IOCs, right? You can look for lagrom.com. You can kind of get an idea of the impact scope, right? Has it only been to those 4 workstations? Yes. Can I see the users associated with these activities? Also, we can see that also, right? You get that kind of visibility. The other things we can do is we can look for, maybe they used, remote access technology like TeamViewer, and they deployed it to certain workstation to gain persistence, right? We can actually have some visibility into the environment to see, what host names these particular applications are installed on and what users actually are using these, right? Like, do they have enough privilege? Should they be using this? Is it malicious adversary activity or facetious employee activity, right? Allowing them to do their job easier, right? But really not thinking about security, right? You can also look for other tool sets. And that's the one big thing of understanding the tool sets that these guys are using. You can actually gain some value into actually seeing these particular tools in your environment and understanding, is it normal for this user? Is it normal for this endpoint, right? But allow you to continuously sweep and scan the environment for the IOCs associated with this group. The other piece is think of this as a black box. So, right, as that data gets fed into XDR systems, there's going to be direct mapping to MITRE. So if you're looking for things like remote service, right, being utilized, whether it's SSH, whether it's RDP, whether it's PS exec, right, or over a min share, you can gain visibility into those particular tactics and techniques by looking for them directly, which can allow you to look for indicators of attack inside your environment, allow you to evolve your search as you move forward, and very dynamically search capabilities with these data lakes, right? So you can refine your search and you can have an understanding of what's actually happening in your environment. That's the last bit that I have on the display piece and the overview of what an XDR system can bring and what visibility it can bring. It's more than events. It's all of the activity coming from multiple layers and serves a lot of value when you investigate. And so quickly, I just want to do a quick conclusion on what we saw today and really how you can adapt your security practice around these evolving threats. So one, you've seen that an XDR system obviously can help gain the necessary visibility into these activities, right? Rapidly patch all internet-facing systems and applications, right? Don't let them use tools like Metasploit to find that chink in your armor to allow them access into your environment. Ensure that you have capabilities such as behavior monitoring or predictive machine learning turned on, right? These are really what are designed to deal with emerging threats, right? Based on behavior that, has been seen before or code that's been seen before, allowing, you obviously to protect yourself against these particular threats. Ensure that you have a defense in depth approach, right? Layer on layer, ensuring that network and host, they all have their different layers applied, right? Allowing you to apply security from multiple layers. And last but not least is adopt a zero trust model. You know, as a security analyst in a former life, I worked with least privilege, very complicated, right? Zero trust is where we need to get. It's a very complex approach, right? It's not a solution. It's a mindset. It's a philosophy. Really, it's the next generation of ensuring that a device is the device it says it is, a user is the user that it says it is, right? This is where multi-factor authentication really comes in. And in organizations today, you should have multi-factor authentication wherever you can to ensure that who is accessing your systems, at least you have that confidence of another layer to say, yes, I've identified this resource, right? Which becomes very powerful. With that, I'm going to thank you for joining today. Really, we do have a breach detection resource hub available, very convenient QR code that you can scan. I'm going to leave this up for a minute, but lots of resources there, you know, information on the breach detection topics, right? We have these webinars will be posted there, information on our research itself. Maybe if you want to take an XDR system for a test drive, that's also available to you. And also I'm going to put my email out there. So like I said, my name is Kent Stevens. My email address is kent_stevens@trendmicro.com. If you have questions after the webinar, if you think of something in the future, you know, please feel free to reach out to me and I'll help you, help guide you through your XDR journey. And with that, I'm actually going to hand it back to Eric, the host. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kent. And thank you, Jay. This is where we're going to get into the Q&A, you know, part of the session here. A few people have asked questions already. I know one question did want to ask, and you guys can just feel free to put it in the chat to let us know is we want to continue to have future sessions about the different threats and things that are out there. Some of the things we're thinking about are around vulnerabilities, ransomware, what, you know, some of the modern techniques are around that, you know, post-COVID world, those types of things. If you have any ideas, you know, feel free to put them in the chat, please, and let us know, and we'll take those into account. Just to give some of the questions here that have been asked. I believe this one will probably go towards Jay, but anybody on the panel is welcome to pipe up. But mentioned that attacks likely started, you know, took 10 to 15 days. You know, why is this activity not usually visible in a company's network? You know, why is it harder to detect? I don't know who wants to take that question.
Excellent question. I'll take that, Eric.
Okay.
So yeah, most attacks usually take, sophisticated ones actually take to this level, take around 10 to 15, maybe 14. This one actually took accordingly lesser than 10 days. And it's, I'm one of those folks that actually really say that there's no such thing as a magical hacker. There is no such thing as a magical attack. I believe that this was tracked and logged somewhere because most systems, most environments, most applications would have maybe access logging, maybe logs for troubleshooting, you know, for auditing purpose and whatnot. And so I believe that there would be some traces of this over time as they were going through the environment. It's just not, it wasn't watched, right? So what makes it even harder to detect that is that they were using very normal tools, right? So for example, if we took a classic staging mechanism of staging this data that they need to exfil, for example, so DarkSide Ransomware Threat Actor Group have used some other tools, but we've seen sneakier ones where they actually used like built-in Windows utilities to pack this data, stage it, and actually exfil it out through common means. So the reason why it's actually harder to detect is because they were using the environment against itself, and they were using very interesting tactics that I guess is very hard to track if you're not watching for the anomalies. So I do believe that given the chance, it may have been visible if they knew which one to watch. It's just that it's very hard to pick and choose what to watch.
Thank you. Also, another question that was asked here. This one just came up. Do we know where the LogRum site was hosted at, or who was hosting that?
Everything was cloud-based. So they leveraged from my research, it was either in Cloudflare or AWS where a lot of they built a very robust content delivery system within their environment, all cloud-based. So they had a very good solid CDN network they had built, all cloud focused.
Okay. There's a few questions around this. I'll kind of combine them into one here, but what are some of the critical defenses that organizations should invest in to help prevent this type of attack?
So I'll take that one. Essentially, you still need a good mix of the fast detection capabilities on the market. So having signature at as many levels as possible to deal with the known bad right away, and then having a depth within a detection and response capability that lies underneath it to catch the slow attacks that happen as they use legitimate tools and move throughout your system, use unknown files, right? Becomes, very relevant to have both those fast detection capabilities and those slow, obviously, recording capabilities. Other, security controls you should bring into your environment is sandboxing is very important when it comes to unknowns, both file and URL. You need that behavior monitoring and predictive machine learning to deal with the emerging threats. Other security controls you can bring in are obviously intrusion prevention capabilities at the host layer, at the network layer, right? Really layering on those protections. And then application control is a huge security control that you can use when it comes to ransomware, ensuring they can't execute their executable on your workstations. And last but not least is that zero trust model is going to become so valuable as we move forward with these new attacks, right? They're leveraging valid accounts and environments and getting in through mechanisms which we should have dealt with previously, because none of the gaining entry phases are new. They're using old techniques, right? You just really have to have those layers there to provide those layers of protection when necessary.
I'll also like to add on to that. So if you're looking at a posture, right, what position you need to take, there is detect, prevent, which the industry is actually very great in doing. So you get rid of the obvious, so that's detect, prevent. However, there's detect and then provide visibility. And this is where I believe a lot of the organizations have not really fully invested in, and maybe haven't really tweaked their view on security on. So for example, if you say detect, prevent, and you're able to log, let's say, the number of attacks you've prevented over a course of a day, and maybe break that down to, I don't know, that would be anti-malware events, which malware family, so on and so forth. Or maybe on your IPS block so-and-so intrusion attempts, block the execution exploits, and you present that in a pie graph. That doesn't really help. That's like a statistic that if you look into it, it gives you like a feeling that the technology is working, but doesn't actually give you much, right? So if you tweak that a little bit, instead of presenting that in a pie chart, for example, and you observe these events over time, then that gives you a little bit more visibility on what you're looking at, right? So if you've been observing that there is a couple of number of phishing attempts over time, and then there's like a normal uptick in a particular day or a particular period in time, so a week, a quarter, then that tells you that there was like a significant event on your environment that was targeting your environment very specifically, and that's where you need to focus on that. What was weird with that uptick? And so detect, prevent, great. Detect, gain visibility is where we want to be, and that's where you want to invest in.
Okay, there's a question. I know this is something we've talked about in the past. Was asked, how people are gaining access if they don't know your credentials. So obviously, one of the reports is this particular attack might have been caused through VPN, but they had the credentials. So could you maybe explain how that happens? I believe that'd be for you, Jay.
Yeah, I get this question a lot, actually, dealing with with some of our customers. So short answer, we don't know. We don't know. Longer answer is we could generally assume that these credentials have been pilfered over time, and that user accounts being user accounts and passwords being passwords the reuse of a user account and password combination has been a known industry issue for the longest time. So much so that the tendency for the human being to like just type in a passphrase that's very familiar for them, even though it was used in the past, and maybe you're thinking that's not going to be something of an issue if I reuse that a couple of years later. That actually usually comes back and becomes an issue further down the line. So it's also important to remember that these are the access to these environments. They might have been bought and been acquired by a third party, by these access brokers, and that's where we see that this ransomware as a service industry is actually going. They usually buy credentials and then try to get lucky, essentially.
No, that makes sense. Thank you. And this question's been asked a few different times by different people, but given people's limited budgets and where they need to make their investments or anything, if you had to prioritize, how you invest things, what are some of the tools you'd recommend that people put in place, sooner rather than later versus other ones if they wanted to try to prioritize different things? I'm paraphrasing kind of about 3 or 4. That question got asked a few times. So does that make sense? So I don't know if Kent or wants to take that, or if you do, Jay.
Jay, can you grab that? That would be a question for you. Where would you see them apply their budget, right? Or are you seeing the most value?
Yeah, because obviously, a lot of people do have a lot of endpoint protection, other things, but the threats are expanding beyond that. So where do you think they should look at next?
That's tough.
I want to weigh in on that one. I really do, because I think knowing what you've got, it's the visibility piece. A lot of people, they always go to, I need to protect it, I need to protect it. But you can't protect what you can't see. And I think that's truly where, the XDR and the Vision 1 side of things comes into play. You don't necessarily need to have every toy available to you, but you have to know what's out there. A lot of people don't even know what's in their network, unfortunately. But you can gain some visibility into that and truly see what the threat pattern analytics are within your environment, utilizing a tool like Vision 1.
If the other thing also to consider is that if you're looking at your environment, not all of the hosts are the same. You don't weigh the criticality and the importance of each host the same. So you're looking at your environment and you take stock on what technology that you have there. Where does your data, your important data, actually reside? Right. That's one of the first questions that you kind of want to answer first. Where is your data? Where does it reside? And what are the protections around it that you could actually utilize? So once you're able to identify your critical hosts and actually identify where the crown jewels are and what the nature of that is, could be data, your external customers, could be corporate data, could be financial data, just whatever. That's the criticality of your host. When you're able to identify that, you want to see what are the technologies around it that's actually protecting that data. Then after that, you want to take stock of, okay, based on this technology, what can I use first before spending your money? What are the technology that I could use first to somehow grab this data and then interconnect them and then make that visible? And so once you see, oh, okay, I got so-and-so router, I had so-and-so firewall, I had so-and-so anti-malware solution. Oh, you know what? I don't have an EDR solution. That's actually a visibility issue for me. And then that's where I invest, right? Then once you're there, you take back and say, okay, once I have all of these things visible, is it something that I could do at scale, something I could watch 24/7? Or is there some alerting or some sort of service that I could take advantage of? And then you try to go down that path. So again, for me, it's actually really visibility and taking stock on what you have in your environment. If you can let your technology talk, that would be the great thing, right? That's absolutely a great investment that you could do instead of ripping and replace, and really making your technology talk, classically through APIs or maybe third-party integration. that would be a great investment. And then after that, you zoom out and see what other aspects, and maybe look at your list of your critical hosts or maybe your assets within your environment that you want to invest next. But first, start with your crown jewels.
Thank you, Jay. Another question that's come up here a few times is obviously if VPN was the route into here, the importance of multi-factor authentication. I know it's something I always tell my customers they need to do. But the question's been asked here: do we feel that may have stopped this particular breach if they would have had multi-factor authentication on their VPN? A few people have asked that. I know it's difficult to say, but
I mean, go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, the by itself, it would have made it difficult for the threat actors to compromise it through a VPN if that was indeed the method of access. Multi-factor authentication has, over time has been proven to be a very valuable augmentation of authenticating access, because the known combination of username and password is essentially broken due to the simplicity of it, right? So we could go through password cracking, password dumping, but essentially you're just focusing on one pair of information, having that augmented with another method of access or authenticating access has been a proven point to prevent or make it even difficult. I wouldn't say really prevent, but make it inherently difficult to compromise. Over to you, Ken.
No, that was right along the lines of where I was going. It's perfect.
okay. There's been several questions around too if if a good backup scheme is a solid strategy, the kind of counter ransomware. That question's been asked. Obviously, trying to restore the system's backups play a thing in that. But is there any type of scheme that we've seen that we may recommend over another? Is the question, especially given the fact these attacks may happen over days or weeks or months.
Yeah, so from sitting in my previous life in a security chair, I always adopted the 3-2-1, right? Essentially 3 different copies, 2 different sources, and 1 offsite, allowing you to, if they do attack your backups, there is 1 not in the same environment as the others, ensuring that you have multiple copies. But yes, it is a good strategy. But obviously, these guys are going into the environments looking for those backups. So making sure you have 1 offsite is very important. But then the restoration process has to come in of, have these backups been tested, right? There has to be a good practice around those backups also that has to supplement that good practice. So.
Okay, let's see here. I'm trying to go through the questions here. We've already covered the visibility. There's a couple of questions on network visibility. Let's see, this question here is why, when someone is, this is, I think we've covered, but someone's surprised when you have, firewall, antivirus, and other things, people are still getting attacked. So answer on that, I can kind of take that is even when you have the right tools in place, you got to make sure they're properly configured, the best practice that you're keeping up to date, on any settings or software updates. Obviously, if they're cloud-based solutions, those are being updated automatically, those types of things. I think, and I'm not seeing everything that's in chat, but looks like we've addressed the questions here in the Q&A. Know if other people have anything to comment on. Like I said, if you could at least put in the chat, any suggestions you may have for future sessions. We're thinking of doing things around vulnerabilities, doing more of a deep dive in the ransomware. But like to have that as was mentioned before, we do have a breach detection site, trendmicro.com/breach detection. The recording of this event and all the materials around it will be posted there, as well as information about future events, and as well as about information from security blogs and other sources will get posted there as well. So we're kind of coming up at the end of the time. Unless people have some more questions, we can kind of wrap things up here. No, I hear silence. just make sure we got everything wrapped up in the chat window. Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for their time today. Really appreciate you joining us. Hope you got something out of this. As Kent mentioned and others mentioned, feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. My name's Eric Wing. You can reach out to me directly. It's Eric_Wing at trendmicro.com. You can reach out to anybody that's on the panel here using that same email format. And again, we really appreciate you joining us, and hope to hear from you again soon. Thank you.